And let's kick off our discussion today, which is on a very important topic, elder abuse. And I'm delighted to welcome Jackie Schroeder to the stage, who is going to be our panel member today. And really, Jackie, this topic is so important, and there's so many changes going on in the world, and our elders are so vulnerable. We can never talk about this enough, because any elder abuse is too much elder abuse. But if we can increase the awareness, hopefully we can curb some of this. But before we dive into this, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led to your current position.
Yeah, hi, Steve. It's really great to be here. I've been looking forward to hanging out with you. I love what you're doing here. It's so important. I've been a social worker for many, many decades. I consider myself one of them that we're talking about. And in my younger days, I focused on system change for serving kids, emotionally disturbed kids and teenagers and their families. And then I went into private practice and focused a lot on geriatric clients, because I took care of both of my parents through their illnesses and into their deaths, and saw how particularly my father was treated in the early days of assisted living, and knew that I needed to make some changes in that world. And I got trained as a long-term care ombudsman. And right after that, I was diagnosed with lung cancer. And so I didn't actually spend a lot of time in the nursing homes just to protect myself, but the foundational learning was critical. And then I went to work as a thought partner to build a village in Baltimore, the first village in Baltimore. So learned about that village model. And then from there, I was recruited into my current job, which is the director of elder abuse, the Elder Abuse Awareness Program at Ghana. Ghana is an agency of the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore. And since I've been in this job, I got certified in geriatrics, and I also am the project coordinator for a federal grant from the Department of Justice, Office on Violence Against Women, to end abuse in later life solely in Baltimore City. But the efforts that we've been making are really impacting everything statewide. And so I love to be in a situation like I'm in with you right now to educate people, because elder abuse is such a hidden problem. It's really a hidden epidemic. And I like to say that we have to become huntresses and hunters, not just as professionals, but within our own families, because often abusers are very charming people. And it's difficult to think about the audacity that someone would have to harm an older person. Particularly, I think I mentioned this to you, I have a motto that we are them. And if we are fortunate to live long enough, we will be them. We might not, have other certain problems or life challenges, but we will be old. In fact, I already am. I'm 69 this year. So I'll turn 70 in 23.
And you're older than somebody who's 68, I mean, it's all relative.
It's all relative, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, this is, I think that, and then also, I don't usually talk about this, but my grandmother lived with us when I was growing up. And actually she lived with us because her husband was abusive. And I didn't realize the impact that had on me until I got recruited into this job, because I thought, I don't really want to dwell in the world of elder abuse. And in graduate school, they don't teach about trauma and domestic violence and elder abuse. And certainly it needs to be taught, because any social worker is going to encounter elder abuse, domestic violence in their career. So we need to be educated. Anyway, that's a different conversation. So can I dive in?
Oh yeah, this is wonderful. So I'm going to drop behind the curtain and you can share your screen. I know you've got a really good PowerPoint for everybody. I want to remind everybody in the audience, the best part about these discussions is they're live and interactive. So don't hesitate at any point in time to type in comments or questions. And then Jackie, if anything kind of comes on my radar, I may jump in, but then also feel free to take a break or two while you're going through your PowerPoint, and I'll let you know if there's anything in the discussion that of relevance to what you have talked about.
Yeah, that sounds great, Steve.
Alrighty.
I like to start with giving people a tip on how to take care of themselves while listening to a presentation like this. This is not a sexy topic. It's not a topic that most people want to hear about. When I'm out socially and people ask what I do, they say, "Oh, that's very nice. Nice to meet you." And they walk away, you know. So right now, I realize that there are people listening who might be experiencing abuse, who have experienced it or have known it in their families or friends. And so the information can be very upsetting for some people. So here's a way that you can quickly take care of yourself, a way maybe you haven't heard of before. But make sure that you keep your feet flat on the floor. Bring your awareness into the space between where the bottom of your feet and the ground meet. And then open your hands and gaze into the very center of your palms. This will help you to calm down and it'll help you to get very present. So just take a second and look into the palms of your hands. And you'll notice you might take a nice inhalation and a cleansing breath, and go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do in this short amount of time that we have, I could spend all day with you and more, is I want to talk about what elder abuse is, its prevalence, why people abuse, how it happens, and what you can do about it. I know this is a lot of information to cover in a short time, and we'll pause in between and we'll get through as much as we can. There's a lot. I noticed in the chat before we started a care manager from Alexandria. So I realized that we're going to have listening professionals as well as community members. And hopefully this will address both of you. But I want to start with what elder abuse is not. There are a lot of myths involved with elder abuse. And the biggest myth that I want to tell you is that caregiver stress is not the cause of elder abuse. Is it a risk factor? Perhaps. But if you've got 10 people taking care of 10 older adults, 9 of them are not going to abuse. And what do those people do? They call for help. It was in the early 90s that the research came out that said caregiver stress was the cause. And the only reason the researchers said that was because they couldn't find the reason. And it stuck. We dedicate a lot of resources to caregiver training, which is a great idea. We need it. But let's not confuse it with the cause of elder abuse, because what the cause of elder abuse is, this human rights violation and significant cause of illness, injury, loss of productivity, isolation, and despair, is the desire for power and control. Elder abuse is defined by the World Health Organization as a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action, which might be considered neglect, by a caregiver or other person in a relationship. Elder abuse is about the dynamic of a relationship where there is an expectation of trust. That's the hallmark of elder abuse, expectation of trust, where that action or lack of action causes or creates a risk of harm or distress to an older person. Now, the thing that's interesting is you can look in different states around the country or different organizations that advocate for elder rights, and you're going to find different definitions. The Maryland definition only focuses on physical abuse and on a person being vulnerable, which has in statute in Maryland a legal definition. A vulnerable person is somebody who lacks the capacity to make their own decisions or to meet their own daily needs. Well, in my work, I've worked with, from the beginning of our program in 2013, about 700 or 800 victims surviving. And the vast majority of them are perfectly capable of making their own decisions and meeting their own daily needs. And physical abuse is not the most reported form of abuse. Only about 16% report physical abuse. So I want to ask you, everyone, a couple of questions. I want to give you a couple of scenarios asking you, do you think that this is okay or not okay? And I can't see you, but I think Steve can. And you could just thumbs up for okay, thumbs down for not okay. And if so,
yeah,
what?
or just write something in chat.
Or in the chat, you could
yeah.
just put yes, no, or so is like a sideways thumb. So when Lamont's grandson comes to visit, he takes all the change off the table without asking or getting permission. Do you think that's okay or not okay? Harry's son sometimes doesn't pick up his medicine when the medicine is ready at the pharmacy because Harry's son is just too busy. You think that's okay or not okay?
Well, so far, everybody's saying not okay.
Not okay.
To both of
Okay,
those. Yeah.
good. Betty feels like her home health aide helps her too much. Think that's okay or not okay? And how about this one? Barbara's sister moved all of her things out of her apartment when she went into rehab. Think that's okay, not okay? So just
so I think all of those were not okay, but the one that I think is worthy of a little bit of discussion is the home aid, because a few people said depends. Can you clarify that one a little bit?
I'm going to clarify that in the conversation that goes forward. Okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So let's look at the prevalence. 2/3 of elder abuse is perpetrated by family members. Half of those are adult children, 20% by spouses, lovers, partners, adult children or adult grandchildren. Now, we hear this data thrown around about 1 in 10 adults over the age of 60 are being abused. First of all, this data is only based on research with community dwelling older adults. It doesn't include people residing in skilled nursing facilities or in assisted living facilities. And this is only what's reported. It's surmised that for every 24 cases of elder abuse, only 1 gets reported. And look at the data on how many people over the age of 60 that are killed, who they're killed by. 42% by family members, 1/4 of them by spouses or lovers or partners. Elder abuse is a very, very hidden problem. And where adult children and grandchildren are concerned, often there's an emotional or financial dependence on the abuser. And where there's abuse by a spouse, often there is long-term domestic violence in that relationship that maybe has escalated or become too dangerous as people get older. You know, Steve, when somebody comes into the hospital because they've fallen, we're all ageists, and it's assumed that they fell because they're old or because their blood pressure dropped or there is a medication problem. But has anybody ever asked them, did somebody push you? Because when you're younger in a domestic violence relationship and you get pushed, maybe you just sort of lose your balance a little bit. But when you're older, that could mean you land down the steps, break your neck, break a hip, end up in a nursing home for the rest of your life, or die.
Yeah, and you know what I like about that scenario that you just painted, as you said, when you started, that the people committing abuse against elders are very charming and crafty, and they know that. They know that, oh, this is because you're not as mobile, or you lost your balance, as opposed to potential abuse.
Right, exactly. So these are the types of abuse we hear about all the time: verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, financial neglect. But what we don't hear about as often, but we'll start to, is digital abuse, stalking. As baby boomers continue aging and we're all using devices, stalking will be more prevalent. And also, Steve, this is a horrific topic that you might want to bring some conversation to at some point, and that's the human trafficking of older adults for their benefits, meaning their Social Security, VA checks, their pension checks.
Oh
They're
my
being
God,
trafficked. Yep, they're
I
being
had no
trafficked
idea.
for, yep, for labor, for sex, and
Uh,
believe it or not, even body organs. We just had our second case of human trafficking, and this is a very serious problem. I want to point out in these types of abuse, just a couple things. In some states, emotional abuse has become a crime. In Maryland, that happened, I think it was 2 years ago, but we're not the only state. Sexual abuse is the least reported form of abuse. However, it's happening. And I'll tell you that I'm going to go over a couple of these, some of the indicators. But what I want to say about sexual abuse is, when I first started doing this work, I was so embarrassed, Steve, so ashamed to talk about it. But I realized that when somebody told me that her husband was raping her in the middle of the night, that if I didn't have the courage to talk about it, nobody would, and that it has to be talked about, because we can't pretend that it's not happening. When that happens to somebody, they need a lot of support. Less than 1%, less than 0.5% of sexual abuse gets reported. Financial abuse, financial exploitation by my police partners is considered the crime of this century. And people are losing their entire life savings over that. And it's increasing every day, because scams and fraudsters, Steve, go to school to learn to fraud, just like card dealers in Las Vegas go to school to learn how to deal cards so that the house wins. Like, gamblers don't usually win that much. And fraudsters know exactly how to emotionally manipulate people in such a way that after they've got them hooked is when the ask comes.
okay.
And we had a client who thought it was a game when she was putting her cash in between certain page numbers in People magazines and mailing it off. So we really have to be alert to what's the latest fraud. Like right now, one of the top frauds is romance scams. There are billions of dollars being lost in romance scams. And it really picked up steam during the pandemic, when people were isolated and lonely. And, you know, I want to say just about this word abuse, Steve, that a lot of older people don't know they're being abused. And when it is happening, they don't really like that word. They're unfamiliar with that word, and it's unacceptable. They'd rather hear words like disrespectful or sacrifice or suffering, something that might be more culturally appropriate.
not to derail the direction we're going, but somebody wanted to clarify one of the percentages in a previous slide. It says the 66% is just for people in the community. It's not 6% combined in the community and in facilities.
Correct. That's
okay.
correct.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's just people who are living in their own homes or with others in the community, not in nursing homes. There's a concept called polyvictimization. So what that means is don't wait for somebody to be abused a second time to try to help them, because it might not ever happen a second time. It might be only once, but it could be multiple times. Polyvictimization is also where more than one form of abuse is happening at the same time, or there could be multiple abusers. And I honestly have not had one client that wasn't experiencing polyvictimization. I think emotional abuse is really at the foundation of all other forms of abuse. And so for that reason, I want to just go over a couple of those signs.
One other stat that I want to make sure we clarify.
Yeah.
Because Elizabeth was interpreting the 42% chance of being killed by my family. It does not mean that if you are 60, there's a 42% chance of being killed by your family. It means that murders of people age 60 plus are 42% of those murders are committed by a family member.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Thanks,
exactly.
Elizabeth. Hopefully that clarifies and makes us all sleep better at night. But then also thank you, Carrie, for clarifying that as well.
Right. And so for all of the people who get murdered over the age of 60 by their spouses or by their family members, 24% of those are by their spouses or partners. Okay. So this emotional abuse warning signs, some of the things that I want to point out, because, you know, you can, for all types of elder abuse, I recommend that you Google types of elder abuse and warning signs, because you'll find that information all over the internet. You don't really need me to do that, but I want to point out a couple of things about emotional abuse. One is that a warning sign can be anxiety, depression, and withdrawal. And because of our ageism, a lot of times people think old people get depressed and then they isolate. And I'm here to say that that's not normal. Depression is not normal in anyone. And so put on those elder abuse lenses, become a huntress and a hunter, and ask yourself, is this new depression something clinical that happened to them? Is it a life situation? Is it an environmental situation? Is it abuse? Is this person experiencing abuse and we don't know it? Also, there can be when a person is isolated against their will and they're not allowed to receive phone calls or visitors, or somebody is discrediting them, not allowing privacy. But I want to go even a little bit deeper into this, because I don't think that in our society, we actually understand that emotional abuse is actually emotional abuse. People say, oh, these behaviors like, you know, judging others, criticizing others, accusing and blaming, giving somebody the silent treatment, sulking and pouting, withholding attention, giving condescending looks. Oh, you know, that's just their behavior. That's just their personality. They've always been like that. You know, that's just them. I'm not going to pay any attention to them. But I'll tell you, sticks and stones might break my bones, but words do hurt. And they go down deep into a person's entire identity. And it can shape how a person lives out their whole life. If they get treated with emotional abuse when they're young, it can land people in the hospital when they're old. It can even lead to, just emotional abuse can lead to suicide in older adults. It's a very serious problem. And I want to point out about sexual abuse, the same thing about depression. Wonder to yourself, is this man or this woman being sexually abused? And by the way, the year before the pandemic, 50% of my clients were men, although still 2/3 of elder abuse victims, survivors are women. And we're 30 years behind the battered women's movement, and we've got a long way to go. But if you see a recent incontinence, don't let your ageist brain think, oh, old people become incontinent, because that might not be what's happening. Elder abuse is a very, very hidden epidemic. Okay, now I use this word caregiver. I have one of my soapboxes is that I really don't like this word caregiver, because I helped my parents when they were older and they needed help, and I was their daughter. I was being a loving family member helping them. A caregiver is a person who is not part of the family, who's being paid to provide a service. I wasn't providing a service. I was being a good family member. I wish that this word would change. I really do. But these indicators are very important. But people who abuse can be very charming, but then really, really nasty and harmingly abusive when they're in private. A caregiver could say, like, this person is difficult, and might try and convince other people that they're incompetent. Also, and this was my, gave too much question, Steve, that somebody asked. Overly attentive to an older adult could be masking controlling behaviors. It's not natural to be in a person's space all the time. A person needs to be respected to do and perform whatever they're able to perform without being controlled and told what they can do and what they can't do. Who they can talk to, who they can't talk to, who they can visit, who can visit them, whether or not they can go to the beauty shop and get their hair done, whether or not they can go to the doctor appointment. So that's what I mean by too much. Okay, does that make sense, Steve? I have another
Sorry,
question.
had to get my, had to unmute my mic. Yeah, that makes sense, definitely.
Great. And then here are a couple more true and false questions. You can always tell who's being abused, yay, nay. You can always tell who is abusing, yay, nay. Both of them are false. You cannot tell.
That's our audience is very knowledgeable. Yep.
Great. Perfect. Can you imagine that this person in her wheelchair is the abuser, right? All right, so why do people abuse? I want to tell you the difference between a healthy relationship and an unhealthy relationship first, because the dynamic of the relationship is what's underlying the abuse. So healthy relationships are where there's equality and respect, where there's a balance of power and between the two people. And signs of a healthy relationship are you feel safe and supported and cared for. You feel like being social. You feel like you're equal. You feel heard and respected. An unhealthy relationship is based on power and control, where one person is doing everything possible to gain the upper hand by taking the other person's power away, trying to take the other person's power away. And the signs of that, you know how you feel when you're being respected. You know how you feel when you're being heard, listened to, cared about. You also know how you're feeling when you feel afraid, if you feel worthless and vulnerable, threatened, insulted, like nobody cares about you, if you know how you feel when someone is trying to control you. You know what this feels like. Relationships always happen along a continuum. Nobody is perfect. It's when the relationship dynamic gets far into that, right side, 2/3, 3/4 over to the far right side. That's when we're talking about the aim for dominance. And that's what we're going to call what is all about older adults being abused, and that's power and control. So power and control, it can happen in a very subtle way. Like, let's say there's a mother and daughter, and the daughter is abusing the mother, and the mother wants to go and get her hair done every week. Like, maybe that's the way the mother gets to have her hair washed. So my grandmother certainly did that when she was a lot older. Some things she might say to her mother would be, "My car is broken, I can't take you." Or she might criticize the mother and say, "You're wasting your money every week when your hair really doesn't look good when you get done." Or, "Your hair looks terrible. You shouldn't be going to that hairdresser." Or she slaps her mother across the face hard enough that it leaves a big red mark, and then the mother doesn't want to be seen in public. Or she might take her to the hairdressers. It's just one small example. And then forget to pick her up and just abandon her there, which is another form of abuse. Another form of abuse that's not on that I haven't mentioned and isn't on the wheel, the power and control wheel, is spiritual abuse. And spiritual abuse is something where, there are sacred objects that people use for their ceremonies and worship. Sometimes those sacred objects get taken away, thrown away, broken in front of the person to intimidate and threaten them. Sometimes the abuse happens during the Sabbath, at a time when phones might not be used or cars might not be driven, ways that people can't get help. So this is called a power and control wheel. And you can find this wheel online. I recommend that you look at this. It comes out of Duluth, Minnesota. And there are all kinds of wheels for all kinds of things. There are elder abuse wheels. There are domestic violence wheels. These wheels have spokes that show the different tactics used by abusers. And some of them we've already talked about, but there's also increasing dependency, which seems kind of counterintuitive, that you don't want that person to be dependent on you. Like, I don't want you making your own decisions. I want you to rely on me for everything. That's ultimately the game, because the more you rely on me, the more control I can have over you. I can take your money. I can take your assets. I can make your decisions. I can threaten you then, and you're going to listen to everything I say, because power and control is about, I want you to do what I want you to do, the way I want you to do it, when, where, and how. And I don't want you to do what I don't want you to do, ever. Now, for people who don't know that they're being abused, I've sat with many people. I've shown them this wheel, and I've had them look at it and say, and ask them, "Do you think you can find your situation here?" And their jaw goes to their chest, and they cry sometimes, and they say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize." So how do people do this abuse? They use these tactics, but how do they actually do it? And why do I want to tell you, everyone, about this today? Because I think when you know that these three concepts, how insidious they can be, you'll say to yourself, "Oh, I didn't know this was just bad behavior. This is really, I'm being abused." So they are undue influence, grooming, and gaslighting. So undue influence, this what I have on my slide right here happens to be the Maryland legal statute for the definition of undue influence. But you get the idea when I tell you that it's all about excessive insistence, superiority of physical power, mind, or body. And it plays out where I want to take control in place of your decision-making. I want it to be my decision-making. So let's say we're living in a senior building and the person the abuser endears themselves to their victim. And they knock on the person's door. They say, I'm going to go to the grocery store. Do you need anything? Yeah, I need a loaf of bread. Let me get you the money. Great. She gets the bread, brings it back, gives her the change. A few days later, knocks on the door. I'm going to the grocery store again. Do you need anything? She says, yeah, but it's a whole list. Don't worry about it. Just let me have the list. Let me get you some money. Don't worry about it. You'll pay me when I get back. She brings her the groceries. She gets paid back. And now a week goes by. She brings her a pot of soup and she says, how about I eat dinner with you? And now they start eating dinner together. And one day she says to her, we spend a lot of money on this rent. We're together all the time. I go to the store for you. We eat together. Why don't we just move in together? We can save half the rent. She says, great idea. Moves in. Now this abuser has access to everything personal of that victim. Access to her credit cards, to her bank account, to her everything. And it happens very slowly, and it's part of grooming. And like, here you are, la-di-da, like the frog in the pot, and little by little, emotionally, there's a mixture of positive and negative behaviors. All relationships start out, everybody's lovey-dovey. You're the greatest thing I've ever met, the best thing since sliced bread. You treat me so great. I've never been able to talk to anybody the way I can talk to you. But then over time, slowly and slightly, abusive elements start to get added in to what's so positive. And over time, it's all familiar, even though it's inappropriate, it starts to feel normal. When people hear things over and over and over, they begin to believe them. And, whole families have been groomed. We hear about this sometimes, not just with elder abuse, but with child abuse. Like, a child abuser will form a relationship with the whole family and everybody loves this person. So when they start to actually do the abuse, the child is in a terrible dilemma because nobody would ever believe him or her. And the same thing happens with older adults. Nobody would believe that this charming person is here abusing me. This third form is gaslighting. And we've been hearing in the news about gaslighting over the last few years. But I want to tell you that it's a primary tool used by abusers for grooming, where they get the victim to doubt their own reality, what they believe is really true. So gaslighters are confusion makers. This came out of the film, I think it was in the 1940s, called Gaslight. And the guy's at the top of the stairs and he's flicking the lights on and off. And the wife is at the bottom of the stairs. And she says, the lights are flickering. The lights are flickering. What's the matter? And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. You must be crazy. I don't see any lights flickering. Well, that's gaslighting. Gaslighters deflect. They say you're too sensitive. You don't know what you're talking about. That never happened. Or, in a healthy relationship, when things aren't going well for whatever reason, one person goes to the other and says, we have to talk about this. We have a problem. We have to improve our relationship. Both people want to talk about it. But the gaslighter is going to say immediately, I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. Remember that time 2 years ago when you did blah, blah, blah? You're the one who did it, not me. Now, it's difficult because it's subtle. And what we have to do is help people trust that what they are believing and what they know is true is true. But if somebody is starting to have a little bit of cognitive decline and forgets things, they might say to themselves, you know, maybe I didn't really remember it correctly. Maybe he or she is right. Maybe it's just, I don't know. And then they feel despondent. Okay, so what can you do? The first thing I want to talk about is reporting. And there are a lot of barriers. People don't think they'll be believed. They're afraid, they're embarrassed, they're ashamed. They're afraid they'll get put in a nursing home. Sometimes if a person is traumatized, they're unable to speak. It's one of the ways that trauma affects in the body is to become silent. Sometimes there's a belief that if the abuser receives help, the abuse will end. People say all the time in domestic violence, why doesn't she just leave? Well, there are a lot of good reasons. One is because it's at the time of leaving that the situation is most lethal, and it's when people are killed. But also the big 4-letter word that we're coming up to on Valentine's Day, LOVE. I love this person. I don't want him to get in trouble. I don't want him to leave. I just want him to stop doing what they're doing. I did a citywide assessment with all older adults and organizations asking the question, what do people need in order to be safe when they're older? The number one answer was an advocate case manager, not an ordinary case manager, but somebody who, if they tell me what's going to happen to me and what's going to happen to the person hurting me, if I like their answer, I'm going to tell. But if I don't like what they tell me, I'm not telling them what's happening. And then if I tell you, I want you to walk the walk with me until I'm safe. I don't want you to just give me phone numbers and tell me who to call. No. So I want to do another thing with folks, Steve. Let's see what time it is. I think we have a couple more minutes. There's this exercise called First Call that I like to share with people because I want people to understand, and I'm going to give you scenarios of real situations. I want people to understand why we don't get very many reports and what you can notice in your own self that you could apply to others. Now, when you think of these scenarios, I want you to think about yourself. If you're a professional here today, I don't want you to think about your clients. I want you to think about you. I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios, and I want you to tell me who you would call if you want to tell. You don't have to tell. So let's say you're 58 years old, your daughter calls you fat and stupid, she takes your paycheck, puts you on an allowance, and monitors your phone calls. Who would you call first?
Wow. That's a really interesting question. Folks, if you've got a thought on this, friend, domestic violence, no one, family member, friend, adult protective service, APS.
Good.
APS.
How about this one?
Most are
How
APS.
about this? Yeah.
Okay.
How about this one? 68 years old you are. Your husband just broke your wrist and threatened to kill you if you leave. Who would you call first? I'm going to give you more
911.
before you end, Steve. let me give you all of these, okay?
Everybody at that one, everybody said 911 or the police.
Okay. Threatened to kill you, though. That's interesting, right, everybody?
Yeah.
Threatened to kill you and you're calling 911. Okay. Now, let's say you're 73. Your partner had cancer and died last year. Your adult son moved in, is stealing your Social Security and pension checks. Who would you call first?
APS police, APS. I would get in touch with you. APS family or friend, APS. So,
Okay, how
what
about
are the
this one?
okay.
This will be
I'm
the last
curious of
one.
what the correct answers are here. Okay, yeah.
You're 75 years old. Your adult son forces you to watch pornography with him. Who would you call first?
I don't have a son. APS, SVP and APS, SVP, family, APS, family or friend, APS. All right.
Okay, so here's the thing. The majority of people said they would call APS, which is problematic because APS is mandated to only respond to people who are vulnerable. And what that means is a person, it's a legal definition, lacks the capacity to meet their own daily needs or make their own decisions. Okay, so a lot of APS intake people are going to say, sorry, Charlie, doesn't meet the qualifications for investigation. And then what do you do? And then who do you call? You can call a lot of places, but I'm kind of surprised at how many people didn't say no one. When I do this exercise,
there was a couple of folks that said that to a couple of questions, but not many.
Not many, right? When the pandemic, before the pandemic, and whenever I go back into training in person, if I do this exercise, I have everybody stand up and move around the room and stand under a piece of like a sign that says each of these options. And it's very interesting, and we do it in silence. And it's very interesting to watch people move around the room and who they would call and who they wouldn't call. Some people, most people don't even know what these organizations or entities do. They wouldn't even know who to call, where to call. And that's one of the dilemmas that we're facing right now, is that even people to think of calling Adult Protective Services wouldn't even know there's an Adult Protective Services or where that number would be. So, but people are telling in ways that we're not realizing they're telling us. And so I wanted to show you some examples of this. I already told you about he won't let me sleep. How about I don't like my grandson's friends? Well, a situation that we had in that scenario was this grandson was coming into his grandmother's house with his friends in the basement, making dope while they had her locked in her bedroom all day long, and they gave her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich the whole day. I don't like my aide. You know, my father had a stroke, and I had aides come in round the clock, and the aide that I thought was the most knowledgeable, the friendliest, kind of the leader of the three. One day I walked in after work. I went to see him every day after work before I moved him into an assisted living facility. And he says to me, and he didn't speak that much from the stroke, but he touches my arm, and he always called me Locust. He never called me Jackie. Loke, I want her out of here. And he like waved his finger like, I want her out of here. I'm like, Dad, what are you talking about? What's happening? Why? He's like, and he shakes his head and he goes like, out of here. So I believed him. I didn't know what the problem was, but I believed him, and I had to fire her. And we have to believe people when they tell us. Even if somebody has dementia, if they tell you they're being abused, believe them. Believe them. Go with that. What they're telling you is true until you find out that it's not true. Because nobody's going to tell just to get your attention. It doesn't work like that. People will meet with us 6 or 7 times before they give a whole disclosure. So just a few legal tips: make sure you keep your documents organized in a safe place. If things are happening to you, keep track of the incidents and the dates. Only get legal advice from lawyers. Abusers will convince you that they are giving you legal advice and you should listen to them. Do not. If you need a restraining order or a peace order to keep people away from you, we can help you do that. The magistrates and the courts can help you do that as well. There are things that everybody can do. You have to listen to each other. You have to learn the signs. You have to be able to recognize them. Don't get paranoid, like, you know, I'm entrenched in this. It's jaded how I view people, but, you know, just in ordinary daily life, just put on those lenses when you're around older people. You can reach out to my organization anytime. This is the list of places where you could report. We already covered that. If it's somebody in a nursing home or assisted living facility, you can call your local ombudsman and call the Office of Healthcare Quality, and also call the Office of the Attorney General, because they deal with Medicaid fraud. But my organization is located in Baltimore, and we respond to the Baltimore metro area mostly. We have helped people across the state. But the things that I want to point out about my agency is that consultation, first of all of our services are free. We provide a tremendous amount of consultation to family members, to victims, to professionals, and you don't have to even tell us your name when you call. You just call and say, you know, I've got this situation. I can't make sense of it. I don't have any proof of anything. I just have these feelings, and can you help me talk? Can you talk it through with me? Help me think about it. The other thing is we have a chat line, which is very rare. So in the same way that you use a cell phone and you text, where you might not get a response for an hour or maybe even for a day, if you go onto the chat line, there's somebody waiting on the other end to talk to you immediately. So you go to our website, fountainbaltimore.org, and if the chat line is open, there's going to be right there the sign where you click. And if somebody happens to walk in the room and your confidentiality is gone, there's an escape button. You just click it. It takes you into like a Google page. The great thing about it is if there's a stalker, they're not going to be able to find any back information. There's no background that can be picked up in the way that the programming in the computer happens. And then we also have shelter. We don't have a big shelter. We have a studio apartment, and we have shelter in a nursing home, and we have hotel shelter. During the pandemic, we used Airbnb even, but it has not very many people come into shelter. It's rare that anybody comes into shelter, but it is an option, and it is part of the tapestry of services that are necessary. So I want to end with this. We actually have this motto painted on our wall in our office. No one should be a victim. No one should be a perpetrator. Above all else, no one should be a bystander. And I want to say there's really no greater honor than to walk the walk with an older adult into safety, into growth, into making as best a new life as possible. Thank you so much.
Oh, this was great, Jackie, and lots of great positive comments in chat. But let's, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but I want to go through some of the questions and comments that folks have had. And just a reminder to everybody, if you've got to jump off, this is recorded. It'll be on our website later this afternoon. But Veronica says, and this was at the beginning of the presentation, the danger in asking a patient suffering from dementia or cognitive decline that they are being abused. Any sort of thoughts on that? I mean, perhaps somebody could be wrongfully accused. Perhaps it's a legitimate complaint.
Yeah. So I think that you could ask an open-ended, I wouldn't ask a direct question. I would ask an open-ended question like, do you feel safe here? Who's coming to visit you? Is there anyone coming to visit you who you would like to not come again? I'm going to tell you that a judge in Nevada called a couple of months ago. She had a case, a trafficking case, and wanted to talk it over, where an older woman was in the hospital, and her family members received payment for a perpetrator to go into the hospital and have sex with her.
These are horrible stories.
I got to tell you that I've heard and seen a lot of horrible things, but that rocked me. That rocked me for many days. And I think that if you're working in an organization, you can't ask unless you have really solid policies and procedures, and have backup. If you are a professional and you want more training about this, please get in touch with me. You know, it doesn't cost anything to come out and do training with your staff. And we could talk about these kinds of things in detail.
Okay.
And there are ombudsmen and social workers in the hospitals. So and there are hospital-based response programs. So I don't know where you live, but you can, you can contact me and we can talk about it.
And obviously your program is designed to serve Maryland, but you have resources that are on your website and what have you, no matter where people are. But if somebody reached out to you, if they were having difficulty finding their local provider, would you and your team provide people, or do you have like sister organizations across the country?
Yeah, so a great place to check is something called Spring Alliance. I think the web address is spring-alliance.org. It's at the Hebrew Home and the Weinberg Center for Elder Justice in the Bronx in New York. And Spring Alliance is an elder abuse shelter program movement. And we are part of Spring Alliance, and there are elder abuse shelter programs, there you go, all across the country. You could call them and ask if there's an elder abuse program in your city or your state. Also, in Rockville, Maryland, if you're in the DC metro area, is the Elder Safe program at the Charles E. Smith community. And so that would be another place that you might call. The reason that we started was because the House of Ruth in Baltimore, which is maybe the biggest domestic violence shelter program in the country, with over 150 or 175 attorneys, they were getting calls from elder abuse victims, and they couldn't serve them because they were being abused by children and neighbors and doctors. And so, yeah. And I think you can also just Google in your state elder abuse. You can call your Department of Aging, and you can call your local ombudsman program and find out if there are any elder abuse programs in your state.
Great. Okay. Well, let's try to get through some of these comments and questions. This is from Pam, a great one here. She says, there's been talk of an elder abuse registry in Maryland similar to a child abuse registry. Since most abusers abuse people they know, would a registry offer additional protections for people living in the community?
It's a very controversial subject, whether or not it's safe. And it would, I mean, right now in Maryland, we have something called the Maryland Judiciary Case Search. And if somebody's been accused of domestic violence or second-degree assault or things like that, it's going to show up. It's public information. So you can look in your state and find out if you have a judicial registry where you can enter a person's name. And if you're in Maryland, you can do that with all your family members and find out all kinds of things about people, that is hidden. And just because there's been a charge doesn't necessarily mean they were found guilty. But for myself, if there was ever someone with a domestic violence charge, I would not want them opening an assisted living facility. That's me.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
Let's see. Leslie says the change in the son-daughter relationship with the effects of Alzheimer's is overwhelming and turned violent quickly because of aggressive conduct of the frightened adult. What's happening to his or her mind?
I think in that kind of situation, it would be really great to find an excellent geriatric medical team who works with dementias, who can make a change in their medication. That would be my recommendation on that.
Great. Lots of people want you to do do a program for them or training.
Do you have my email address in the chat?
I did. I dropped it in there, but I'm going to drop it in one more time for any folks that are listening here. Then we got, let's see, Elizabeth says, is the main problem that dementia decreases self-trust, or that elder abuse lacked the self-defense skills developed through the experience of having been repeatedly abused throughout life? Boy, that's a thought-provoking question there.
Yeah. Ask it again.
Is the main problem that dementia decreases self-trust, or that the elder abused lacks the self-defense skills developed through the experience of having been repeatedly abused? I don't know the self-defense. Well, I mean, there's a lot of factors here. I mean, when we say self-defense, it's just being able to communicate with others on something that's happened to you. I think with dementia, it's really so many things get much more complicated, but certainly elder abuse really does.
Yeah, in the same way that literally every single case is unique. They might have, some things that we recognize that are similar, but the way that those things play out, each is unique. I would say if it sounds to me like there's a situation that you're thinking of, and I would make a call to just explore what that situation is, get more details, give more details, and try to hash it out and see where you might be able to intervene.
This is a good one from Michelle. How do you tell the difference between an elder parent and child disagreements or arguments versus abuse?
Well, I think that there's have you ever heard, you've gone below the belt? You ever heard that phrase?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's one thing to have an escalation in voice when you're disagreeing, but when it turns into accusations, belittling, hitting, threatening, that's abuse.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And if you're old enough, if you're old enough when you were a kid, there was a belief that it was okay to be spanked. So if somebody like punched you on your bottom once, that's not abuse. But if somebody's taking a belt to you or taking a bar of soap and grinding it in your teeth because you said what they considered a cuss word, that's
Mhm.
abuse.
Yeah. So okay, Marianne says, as an ombudsman, I visited several elderly persons with cognitive decline who became adamant that they did not want certain caregivers. It was because they were persons of color, or she doesn't know anyone, or I don't want her telling me what to do. That could be something to consider when someone is being accused of abuse, or someone doesn't want a certain caregiver to enter the room. And yes, I've heard stories like this many times over the years. Your thoughts on that, Jackie?
Yeah, I think a couple things. The first is the staff should be better trained. And I think this is one of the dilemmas we're facing in our country right now with the shortage of people to work in these places, is because the work is so challenging and so low paid. But I think people need leadership training. I think they need further education, like maybe some associate, I'm sorry, just had a brain freeze, community college education, GED education. And then I think that the person, whoever the ombudsman asking the question is, I think the person still needs to be believed. And they might not like the way they're being treated if they are racist, or if they grew up, maybe they're old enough that they served in World War II, and there's somebody talking to them about, in a nasty way about the military, or they were raised to be not like Black people. I think that you have to work with that gently. You can't just rush through the day and make sure that as long as he gets his food and his medicine, that's enough. This is the person's home. And we have so much work to do with nursing home regulations and education, and think about it. Sometimes people who are working in those jobs or working there, they've been abused themselves. They've been traumatized themselves, and they've never gotten treatment for it. And so they just are reactionary, and we should be addressing that. We should be helping them. We should be helping people who are helping older people. And we just have a long way to go as a society about this. And we're so corporatized in everything that we've lost our, I could just go on and on about that.
Oh yeah. Well,
I would take the time. I'd go to the managers, I'd go to the director of nursing, I'd go to the director of social work, and I would try to have some mediation, some, real conversations, non-threatening conversations, and a lot of training. And if it doesn't work, help this man and this woman, and have different people coming on that shift. Make exceptions for them. Make it a caring communal environment. Don't let your caregivers be bullies.
But also be sensitive to the caregivers being bullied too.
Yes.
Yeah, but again, we can all exist in this world, hopefully. I'm going to finish with one last question that just came in from Michelle. I also am going to drop in next month on March 2nd. I have an attorney who specializes specifically in nursing home abuse cases, who's going to be with us on a discussion. So that should be interesting related to this topic. But Michelle says, how do you prepare for elder doctor visits to ensure that doctors' evaluations are appropriate and not abusive? It can be easy to think things are so different for the elderly that we may not realize inappropriate care, it may be helpful to join the elder in the doctor visit. Yeah, I think my assumption is elder abuse can occur anywhere. I think one good thing, though, that I've noticed in doctors' offices is that doctors are under a lot of financial scrutiny. And I've seen, although somebody who is committing abuse knows how to get around that, but there are a lot of steps that are taken now in doctors' offices to minimize abuse, probably not necessarily designed for elders, probably more designed for children. But any thoughts on that, Jackie?
Well, again, Steve, I think this person is asking a question based on specific experience.
Mm-hmm.
And without knowing more of the backstory, it's a little challenging. I think overall, though, if you think that that older adult is not getting proper care because maybe the doctor's not asking the right questions or enough questions, or the older person is not sharing all the information, I think you could ask permission to go into that appointment with them and leave when you think that those questions have been asked and answered and the information delivered, but only with permissions. And if the older person with, an advanced case of dementia isn't able to give those permissions, then maybe that person needs to be under guardianship, and you get permission from the guardian to be in that exam room. Or
Yeah,
you could, somebody said, Elizabeth said, ask for another. Now, but that would take care of appropriateness, but it doesn't take care of the issue about a doctor is only going to know, will need to know what's really happening in order to best treat you. And if they don't have all the information, then how do they do that?
Yeah. All right. Well, didn't I say before we got on, I said, look, we might go over an hour, but we won't go past an hour and 15, and it's been an hour and 15 exactly. What a great discussion today. It's heart-wrenching, but very important, and you certainly opened my eyes, and I can tell you've opened the eyes of the audience or community members. And again, you've provided some great information, but the folks in the community have asked some wonderful questions and made some great comments. I'd love to do this again with you, Jackie, or we can pick any other topics that the two of us are really passionate about and have a great discussion.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really been great to be here. And again, people can feel free to call, and I'd love to come back.
I love it. All right. Okay, folks.
Thanks so much.
See you. Thanks.